I'm Amy from Be Well Clinic, and this is the second in our series on degrees of digestibility. This is a series that we're talking about different categories of food and understanding more about what makes them digestible or not easily digestible and how we can improve that or make different choices. If you missed the introduction video or the first in the series on plant fiber, you can go watch those. I will put the links to those in the description below. Today we're going to talk about dairy. Dairy is a really cool concept to talk about because when people get dairy explained to them, it actually often opens up the world of them being able to eat different dairy products, even if they've been avoiding dairy all the way. Most people find that they can tolerate some of the more digestible dairy. And when they understand what's going on with dairy, they can make choices. Why do we care about dairy? Because dairy is a beautifully nutrient-dense food. As we talk about dairy today, we're going to actually talk about two different categories that determine the degrees of digestibility. One of them is where the dairy is from, meaning the type of cows and the processing used for that dairy. But the other one is the dairy product, meaning butter versus yogurt. So let's talk about the two different pathways, and then we're going to come together to think about what the most digestible and least digestible food is. First off, let's talk about how that dairy is made. You probably have heard at this point about A2 cows versus A1 cows. The really short answer about that, and there's still controversy even in the natural world, but that A2 cows have a different genetic component, meaning their milk protein is smaller and generally more easy for people to break down and digest. Whereas A1 cows are bred to have a different type of body, but that means that the genetics of their milk means their milk protein is bigger. And that bigger milk protein is harder to break down and digest. So choosing A1 versus A2 milk, if you choose A2 milk, a lot of people can actually have more tolerance to dairy products if they do an A2 because that protein is simply smaller and easier to break down. Of course, in this discussion, we also want to talk about raw or unpasteurized milk versus pasteurizing the milk. When we look at unpasteurized milk, when it's left raw, there are enzymes still present, the proteins haven't been cooked or denatured at all, so that milk is going to be in a more digestible form than when we heat and pasteurize it. When we go over to the pasteurization side, what we're looking at is no enzymes anymore and a certain degree of cooked protein. The degree is actually dependent on how that milk was pasteurized and what part of the milk it is. So how it's pasteurized. First off, we have little vats and big vats. So when you're heating milk in a little vat, obviously it's bigger than this, but when you're heating milk in a small batch, we have to get the milk up to a certain temperature, and the milk in the middle is going to take the longest. So when we have a smaller batch, that milk in the middle is going to get hot about the same time as the milk on the outside. But if you have a very giant vat of milk, the milk on the outside is going to get very hot, sometimes up to 400 or 500 degrees for the inside milk to get up to the temperature of pasteurization. So when you are looking and buying products that are pasteurized, it is good to see and find products that are small vat pasteurized. There is also a term called ultra pasteurized milk. This sometimes is actually the only milk available in certain countries or certain areas of our country. If you only have access to ultra pasteurized milk, some really interesting things happen. You cannot make fermented dairy. Cultured dairy will not grow in ultra pasteurized milk. You cannot make yogurt or kefir or anything like that. So that really shows you the nutritional value of ultra pasteurized milk. And in my case, if that's all I had access to, I probably would look at other ways for the nutrition and not spend my money on an ultra pasteurized milk. Okay, so we have small vat, large vat, and ultra pasteurized dairy. Milk and cream also react differently to the heating process. Milk is hurt much more than cream is. There is a protective factor to fat. And so when you have a small vat pasteurized cream, that cream is very similar to raw cream. There are differences, and if you've tasted both, you can even taste the difference. So again, when you're looking for cream or milk, you can look at these nuances. So even if you're not able to get raw milk, or that's not something you're comfortable with for some reason, then you can find a better option in the pasteurized world. Okay, the more we change milk away from the state that it was created in, the harder it is to digest. So that is a degree of digestibility right there. A2, raw milk and raw cream are going to be the easiest to digest, and ultra pasteurized milk and cream are going to be incredibly difficult to digest. And also, you're not really going to get a lot of nutritional value from those foods. So, there is one spectrum of digestibility related to dairy. All right, so now let's talk about the type of dairy product. Dairy products, meaning ghee, butter, cream, cheeses, yogurt, right? Which things have more or less digestibility? So let's go through the spectrum of different dairy foods and put them in their degrees of digestibility. This is also something that you'll hear people refer to two large categories called soft dairy and hard dairy. This can be a quick and fast way to look things up where a lot of people can tolerate hard dairy but not soft dairy. But before we go through this full spectrum of where things need to land, we need to go through some ideas about why are we categorizing things this way. What are the major components of a dairy product? We have protein, sugar or lactose, and then the dairy fat, and we also have whey, which is another protein. Most people have problems with either casein, the main protein in dairy, or lactose, the main sugar in dairy. These are the things that feed our flora, and if it's not broken down in the upper part of our body, if you remember last video, then it will get down to the lower where most of our microbiome is and feed that flora and produce lots of gas and bloating and things like that. So we want to break down the proteins. We want to break down the sugar or have it broken down for us outside of the body, which is why we culture dairy sometimes. Whey is the second protein or the third thing in the components of dairy in a big picture that we're going to talk about. And the fourth thing would be milk fat. When you have an allergy, by definition, your allergy is to a protein. So, number one, when you only have fat, you can't be allergic to it. There can be other body responses that happen. I have that video about what if it's not a food allergy that I'll also link below that could really talk about this. But if you have only fat, you cannot have an allergy to it. All right, so if we look at degrees of digestibility, now let's take the different dairy products. Ghee. Ghee or clarified butter is 100% dairy fat. There is no protein in clarified butter. So you cannot have an allergy to ghee. Now, again, there are other reactions that happen, and I'm not going to gaslight you if you notice one. I used to react to ghee when I first started healing. But ghee is not an allergy, it's a reaction. A lot of people don't have any problem with ghee. So we have ghee or clarified butter, and then we get to butter. What's the difference? Butter has a little bit of protein. If you cook butter and you notice there's some solids, right? The things that burn when you're trying to cook it on higher heat, or you can just kind of notice if you're warming up butter in your pan, you'll notice some solids kind of floating on the top or sitting in the bottom. Those are milk protein solids, and those are going to potentially cause a reaction even in that small amount, depending on what your body is reacting to. So we have ghee and clarified butter, then we have butter. That's going to be the next tolerated. You can also culture butter. So you can culture your cream and then make butter, and that a little bit of protein that's still left in the butter is now cultured and broken down, which will make more sense in a second, but that may be that you don't react to it. So technically, ghee and clarified butter, cultured butter, and then butter would be our beginning of most people can tolerate all of those, but if you can't, those would be the degrees. So the next thing we have on our degrees of digestibility is cream. And within the cream things, we have cultured cream and not cultured cream. So cultured cream would be more digestible, like sour cream or creme fraiche. And then not cultured cream also has a little nuances, like heavy whipping cream has less likely protein in it. So if you have protein mixed in, just like the butter, that's what's causing the issues. All right, moving on to milk products. So milk products have two major problems: lactose and casein. Whey, although that's a protein, is tolerated by most people. Most people are not having a problem with the whey protein. They have a problem with casein as a protein and lactose as a sugar. If we culture any of the milk products with either kefir or kefir or a yogurt culture, of which there are many, we will break down the casein and the lactose. Lactose is completely broken down within 24 to 36 hours of a culture. 100% of the lactose is gone in a good culturing of milk to a yogurt or a kefir or kefir. You can also get close to maybe 80 to 100% potentially breakdown of the casein protein. So that protein is pre-digested. So people who are having trouble with lactose and casein, if you culture your dairy long enough, you do not have to have problems. Good news on that front. Now, do remember when you're culturing, you're increasing the microbes, and you might get a die-off reaction if you increase them too fast. But you're not probably reacting to the dairy in that case, you're actually reacting to the die-off of the good microbes coming in, which you can work through and get back past. All right, the next category we're going to do is cheeses. This is a broad category and includes soft cheeses like brie, but also farmer's cheese, cottage cheese, cream cheese, and then hard cheeses and medium cheeses like mozzarella, but also Parmesan is a hard cheese. So this whole category of cheeses. The very simple answer for cheeses is the longer it takes to culture, the more it's easy to digest. Just like the yogurt. If it's cultured long, you're going to break down the casein and the lactose, and you're going to have an easier time with it. So if you pay attention to how long your cheese took to make. So mozzarella and brie and other soft cheeses are very quick culture. Cottage cheese can be variant in the middle. And then we have things like Parmesan cheese and even cheddar cheese, which are taking months and many months sometimes to culture. So the longer we culture, the more the lactose and the casein are broken down, the easier it is for you to digest. And the last thing we're going to talk about is milk, literal milk or things we make directly from milk. So you may not think about it, but ice cream, for example, is just made from milk, right? There's no culturing, there's no changing of it. It's cooked maybe if you do a custard, but milk is milk. When you make ice cream, it's milk. You drink milk, or you have ice cream, or you have similar things like that, using milk to cook in, things like that. So with milk, this is where we come to what we talked about at the beginning. Is it A1 or A2? Is it raw or pasteurized, right? Those are going to be your degrees of digestibility there. But hopefully you can see from this whole thing that if we go all the way back to ghee, which should be digestible by basically everyone, all the way up to drinking milk, drinking pasteurized milk would be the most difficult thing to digest. There is a huge amount of degree of digestibility here. And hopefully there's somewhere that you can start putting in some dairy foods. Because again, dairy foods are very good nutritional value for us. And they are also delicious. The last few things that I want to throw in that are just good for us to know about dairy are that the reaction we have to dairy depends to some degree on our liver. If you watch, again, I'll link it below, the video on digestive fire. Digestive fire talks about how hot our stomach acid and our digestion system is overall. And if we have a low fire, a weaker digestive system, dairy is not going to do good, even if you can normally tolerate it. Another thing I want to think about with dairy is kind of what we discussed again with the first video on plant fiber. If you are eating dairy and tolerating it, meaning you're not having major symptoms, but the sugar is feeding the abnormal flora, that will cause problems even though dairy is not a problem, but the feeding of your abnormal flora is a problem. The last thing to really sum up all of this is that debate whether humans are supposed to eat dairy or not. And if you really look at the genetics, there are a large amount of humans that do not genetically have the ability to digest dairy. However, I don't think that means that we're not supposed to eat it. If it's a food that has nutrient density, is easy to obtain, has been used in traditional cultures, and we have good microbiome. So either we're using the microbiome in the dairy to culture it before we consume it, and or we also have a microbiome in us. So yes, not every human can digest dairy on their own, but we can have the ability to digest it with the help of microbes. So I hope that encourages you. I hope that helps you figure out where dairy is for you. I have other videos on dairy and the other videos that I discussed, so make sure you check out those links in the description below. And if you like this video, like it, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video in which we're going to talk about the digestibility of grains, nuts, and seeds. I'll see you in the next one.